Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm very thrilled today to welcome Keith Phipps to the podcast to talk about The Beguiled, starring Clint Eastwood and directed by Don Siegel, released 50 years ago on March 31st, 1971. How are we doing, Keith?
Oh, doing all right. How about you?
Doing well. Thanks so much for being here. Had you heard of this film before or seen this film before?
Oh yeah, it's been a while, but I went through a big films of Clint Eastwood phase. He didn't direct this obviously, but I did a piece for Vulture a couple years ago ranking all the films that he directed. I did not revisit it at this point. I think it's probably been at least 10 or 15 years since I'd seen it.
Yeah, 1971 was a big year for Eastwood. He not only has this film as an actor, but he also has Dirty Harry as an actor with Don Siegel, and he directs his first movie, Play Misty for Me. So 1971 is a big year for him, especially on this podcast too, talking about, these three films for Eastwood.
Yeah, it feels like there was a moment, it was his time to not be pigeonholed anymore. I mean, he was the cowboy actor, right? And yeah. He'd done other parts as well. But, becoming a director was a big deal for him, and Siegel was very instructive. I mean, he talked about Siegel as a mentor. The Unforgiven is dedicated to Siegel and Sergio Leone, which makes all kinds of sense when you see the movie. If you look at reviews, even for, years after, there was this idea of what Clint Eastwood was, and I think he really kept trying to slip away from what the public perception of him was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So before we get to The Beguiled today, Keith, I want to start by kind of asking about you. What role has film played in your life from childhood to now? And do you have a couple favorites?
Oh, from childhood to now, I've watched a lot of movies.
Right?
Yeah, I latched onto it pretty early on. I remember stumbling across a Siskel and Ebert episode way back when, because the movie they were reviewing was called Caveman. Are you familiar with Caveman?
When did that come out?
I think 81. It stars Ringo Starr and Shelley Long.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it is not good. It's not good. But
wow.
These are guys who got paid to watch and write about and talk about movies. That seemed pretty good to me. I remember kind of obsessing over film the film ads in the local newspaper and reading reviews. So, pretty early on, I latched onto it. I started doing film reviews for my junior high school newspaper, and I took a few years off and then came back to it after grad school. My favorite movies, it's a tough question to answer. The easy one I always point to is The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. It's a film
wonderful film, yeah.
Deeply by, love it. For my 40th birthday, my wife rented out the Music Box Theater here in Chicago, which is a grand old movie house and my favorite place to see films, and had surprised me with bringing some friends in. It was quite the night. It was really nice. But I mean, other films, it changes all the time, but I love Richard Lester's Petulia. I have a giant poster of that hanging in my house. 2001: A Space Odyssey is a movie I would go see anytime I can. Pretty much, except for during this pandemic when one theater played it, I've never.
You're like, nope.
Since I moved to Chicago, but it's a film that's new mysteries revealed every time. I love that one, and just because it's on my desk here, I'm looking at this Wong Kar-wai box set, and
from Criterion Collection.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Chungking Express is definitely a movie that another one I would go back to anytime. So if the quality is a film you would watch anytime and be happy to revisit it, those are the ones. Oh, that and Dawn of the Dead, which I haven't seen in years, and I watched it on my birthday this year because the new 4K Blu-ray came out, and it's a movie that. It's imperfect. It's perfect in its imperfections in some ways, and it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I have the 4-disc DVD set of Dawn of the Dead, and it's got I think 3 versions of the movie. It's like a really fascinating box set for fans of the film.
3 different cuts, and I've never actually done the other cuts. I should at some point.
There's one really long one.
Right. I've read descriptions of them, and they seem pretty far, often in some ways kind of far from what Romero intended, but so I'm sure it will be interesting to see a remix of a favorite song or something. I should probably dig in one of these days.
Yeah, and you have a book coming out soon about the films of Nicolas Cage. Can you talk about that?
I do, yeah. October, November. I'm not sure exactly if we nailed down the date, but it's
Okay.
published by Holt. It's called Age of Cage: 4 Decades of Hollywood Through One Singular Career, and it's basically using Nicolas Cage's career as a lens. Well, I want to look at Nicolas Cage's career in itself because it's fascinating, but also as a lens about how Hollywood has changed over the decades since he started as a very young man as Nicholas Coppola,
That's right.
to the point where he is now. I mean, I think he's a great actor. It's a fascinating career, and the deeper I got into it, the more I felt like, yeah, this is really an interesting kind of figure who was there at a lot of pivotal moments and in some ways pushed some of those moments in the direction they went, and in some ways got pushed back when the tide turned on what people wanted to see.
I feel like that would be such a fascinating book because his career has had so many interesting levels, right? Different genres. I mean, the last 10 years of his career has been so wild and unique. And like, there's so many different stages to write about.
And prolific.
Yeah.
Deadline led me to watch a lot of those films, like 5 a day, because, he's turned out a lot of, he just works. He works all the time. And there's some very pleasant surprises in there. And I think a couple of his really best performances have been in the last few years. There's also a lot of stuff I can't in good conscience recommend. Not that he's ever bad in them particularly, but there's some quite poor films in the modern era.
Do you have a few favorite Nicolas Cage movies that maybe some of us haven't heard of, like any that are a little bit outside the mainstream?
Well, I mean, the one that really, this is not far outside the mainstream, I guess, but the one that really kind of made me focus on him in recent years was I went to see Mandy.
Yes, really good.
Great movie, and he's great in it, and it's not really a part anyone else could have played, or at least played that way, and I think it played to all his strengths as sort of a big operatic actor, but also as someone who, draws on real emotions and evokes real deep feelings in those. I mean, that scene in where he freaks out in the bathroom is obviously, people laughed when they saw it, but it's not laughing at him. It's like this laugh of discomfort and recognition of how raw was on the screen. I mean, a few that I think they're not obscure, but a few that I think, a couple that I think maybe got overlooked a little bit more than they should have at the time is Matchstick Men, which that's
a great film.
Yeah, great film, and it kind of got underseen at the moment, and it's another really good performance, and in some of the same ways that what I said about Mandy, where it's just he's harnessing these really huge emotions but using them in the service of a very real character. And I just rewatched it yesterday because I guess I'm making the podcast rounds this weekend. I'm going to be on a podcast tomorrow talking about Bad Lieutenant Protocol New Orleans.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Which was a film that the trailer made the rounds as like this hilarious thing. And it just kind of chooses these really extreme moments from the film, but if you see the film, again, it's a really quite moving and gripping and unusual film, and all kind of anchored by a performance that, again, I can't see anyone else but Nicolas Cage giving.
So I was just thinking, did Nicolas Cage and Clint Eastwood ever make a film together? Like, they talk about prolific careers. I don't think they ever worked together.
No, I don't think they overlapped. I don't necessarily see that be, I don't know. It would be an interesting mix of sensibilities because, Cage still likes to kind of, he makes a lot of creative contributions to his performances, and Eastwood is definitely a one take and done kind of director.
That's true.
And which sometimes is brilliant, and sometimes it's like, that baby looks really fake. Maybe do another pass at that.
Maybe one more take of that, Clint.
Yeah, I don't know, but it certainly would be an interesting collaboration.
Absolutely. All right, so that takes us to our film for today, which is The Beguiled. So I have a brief summary I'm going to share with our listeners who might not be familiar with this film, and then I've got some trivia about the movie, and then you can chime in with anything you want during that part, Keith. So this film takes place during the American Civil War. It's 1863. 12-year-old Amy, a student at the Miss Martha Farnsworth Seminary for Young Ladies in rural Mississippi, discovers a wounded Union soldier, John McBurney, who goes by McB. He's played by Clint Eastwood. She brings him to the school where the headmistress, Martha, played by Geraldine Page, decides to take him in and restore him to health. Many of the young women at the school take an immediate liking to McB, including Edwina and Carol. He starts trying to charm them, including the house slave Hallie, and soon the sexually repressed atmosphere of the school becomes filled with jealousy and deceit. and the women begin to turn on one another. And McBee, who soon shows his true colors to the women, isn't terribly safe himself. It's kind of like the summary I got out of the movie. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, it sounds about right. It sounds right. You mentioned this. If you want to get into the atmosphere of it, it's definitely thick with. I don't know.
It's got a lot of atmosphere.
There's not cicadas constantly, making noise in the background, but it seems like there ought to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the movie's pretty, simple in terms of its setup, and this isn't like a really, really complicated plot by any means, but there's definitely like complicated characters in this movie that I really enjoyed following. So the film was based on a novel called A Painted Devil by Thomas Cullinan. Eastwood was given a copy of the book and was engrossed all the way through. He could see the project as a bold attempt for him to play against type. So early on, like a few years before the movie got made, I think he was looking at the project as a potential vehicle for him, which I find kind of interesting because I feel like late 60s Eastwood, this would not have been an obvious choice for him, right? As you said before, it's a lot of Westerns, a lot of war films at the end of the decade. Mm-hmm. There wasn't really a film like this that showed him in this way, right? Until The Beguiled.
No, absolutely not. And it's rare that, he would really kind of play this kind of character. It's not exactly a passive role, but certainly not a man of action role. I mean, after what he'd been doing, you don't expect him to spend most of a film in bed.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, so that's kind of a unique, kind of interesting thing about this movie is Eastwood's participation in it and this kind of a character. This would be directors Don Siegel's third collaboration with Eastwood. They had worked together before on Coogan's Bluff and Two Mules for Sister Sarah. They would then collaborate the same year on Dirty Harry, which came out at the end of 71. And they would make one more film together, Escape from Alcatraz, in 1979. So what do you think about this pairing, like Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood together, 5 films? Like, how do you think they work together?
I think it's one of the great pairings. Although I should say I've actually never seen Two Mules for Sister Sarah. It's been on my list.
Okay, me neither. Yeah,
films to see.
I didn't get to it last year.
But Coogan's Bluff is quite good as well. Mm-hmm. It's a fun Western cop in New York City film. Early 70s New York is always a great place to shoot a film. And I like Escape from New York quite a bit. Escape from Alcatraz. Escape from New York.
That's a good one too.
Yeah. But I mean, Dirty Harry is really a real favorite of mine. And in some ways, for some of the reasons I like this film, which is you can hold it up to light and turn that film around in a bunch of different angles and never quite know how you're supposed to feel about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. This is Siegel has said this is his favorite film that he directed of his own work, which I found kind of interesting because this doesn't really, it doesn't feel as similar to a lot of his other works. So this is definitely like an anomaly in his career in terms of looking at the way he directs and the style of his films.
Yeah, with the caveat, there's a lot of Siegel films I have not seen because he made a lot of films. Mm-hmm. It feels like an outlier in terms of subject, in terms of style. I know Tarantino, who's otherwise a Siegel fan, has been critical of it as sort of like him being unsuited as a director, but I think it really works. I mean, I do like. I feel like he's trying. It's you describe it, and it's a fairly pulpy setup for a film, mm-hmm. and those impulses are still on display. But he's really, the dream sequences and the weird hallucinatory quality to it, some of the handheld camera, and the just the willingness to like have the sort of this hazy dreamlike quality to it. He does that very well. Some credit has to go to Bruce Surtees, the cinematographer, who worked with Clint Eastwood as the director for years, but it's amazing looking film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So Eastwood had signed a long-term contract with Universal, but he became really frustrated with them. He felt like they botched the release of The Beguiled, feeling that the film was poorly marketed. In the end, the movie only grossed about $1 million, a little bit over $1 million. This eventually led to his leaving the studio. He did not return until 2008's The Changeling. So he bounced on Universal.
To be fair, I'm not sure how you do market this film.
Yeah, I know, right? Like, how do you, it's kind of an unusual story, unusual title. He's not playing a typical, didn't they try to like market it as if like with him with a gun or something? Like they tried to make it look almost like, oh, it's another Eastwood vehicle.
I found a really hilarious tagline. Of course, now I'm not going to be able to find it, but it was something along the lines of Clint Eastwood, like, love him or not. I didn't know what it was, but it was like this sort of like kind of come on like a thing. Like, I mean, you can market it as market it as a sexy film, although I don't think it's particularly. There's sort of a sort of threatening sexuality about the whole thing, but there's I don't know that translates into sexy. But I mean, it's kind of like, I'm not to bring anything back to Nicolas Cage, but I'm like there were certain expectations that have been set up by Eastwood's career, just as, like, you know, Cage had trouble breaking out of the, you know, became a big action hero, but then that's all people wanted of him, and when something didn't quite fit that mold, it didn't really work as well, at least for a little stretch there. But I mean, you know, Eastwood was, like we said, man of action, war hero, and cowboy, and this is none of that. I mean, this character is in most ways reprehensible.
Yeah, I mean, really, the last half hour, I mean, this is a vile character. Not only has he been like laying in a bed the whole movie, but then at the end, you really don't like him, and it's like a really different character for him.
I read a little bit about how there was an attempt to, I think it's even on the Wikipedia page, about an attempt to create a happy ending.
Yeah, happy.
Like, right, where he runs away with Edwina, played by Elizabeth Hartman. Yeah. And I read a review where it's like, it says that he clearly prefers Edwina, as if he'd fallen in love with her. And, you know, did you watch this movie? This is not that. I think he's using everyone. I don't think there's any real affection there whatsoever. I just think he fakes it very well with her.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like, to say that he has the most affection for her and would be happy with her leaving the house, like, I don't think that's made clear in the movie. It seems like he's just kind of using these women at a, you know, moment's whim kind of a thing. And then the final piece of trivia is that Clint Eastwood and Joanne Harris had a love affair while making the movie. So I did look up, because I believe she plays 17 in the movie. I was like, how old was she on the set? She was 21. So
she wasn't 17. But, you know,
those things happen, right?
Yeah, I actually wasn't even aware of that. But you know, she had kind of an interesting career. I remember looking up. She did end up doing a lot of voice work. I think she's still working even. Maybe not so much, but yeah. This was the beginning of a long career, but it's interesting when someone who's marketed or presented as a very attractive character ends up doing a lot of voice work too. You know, it's kind of an interesting turn.
Yeah. And then the final piece, obviously, a lot of people will be aware of that Sofia Coppola did a version of this in 2017 with a great cast: Nicole Kidman, Colin Farrell, Kirsten Dunst, Elle Fanning. So we have one of the things with this podcast is we talk about, well, if this movie were to be made today, what would it look like? We actually have kind of an answer with this movie, since that just came out 4 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's not even theoretical. I like that version too. I think that's quite an interesting film, and in contrast with this in some key ways. I believe it removes the incest element, if I remember correctly, right? Have you seen it?
I saw it right when it came out on Blu-ray, so it's been 3+ years, and I had not seen this 71 version before. So and I'm going to say it at the top here. I mean, I really enjoyed this movie. Actually, it's one of my favorites I've watched for 71 so far. But I'm disappointed that I had already seen the Sofia Coppola versions, because I kind of knew at least the bare bones of the story and what was coming, because it is pretty similar to the 71 version. I believe the remake ends the same.
Yeah, I was gonna say, you knew about the mushrooms ahead of time.
That scene, I knew exactly what was coming, whereas if I had not seen the Coppola version, I might have been a little bit more surprised by that reveal of the mushrooms. Yeah,
I believe the Coppola version came out the same year as the Phantom Thread, so it was a good year for mushrooms.
That's right. So what did you think of the 71 version, Keith? What had you seen this one before, like the 71 version? Okay.
Yeah, I had seen this one before, and I liked it both times. It's this strange movie. It's a weird Southern Gothic, strange, like kind of, like I said, kind of darkly erotic film. That touches on the themes of war and North versus South and slavery versus freedom, and without really telling you how to feel about any of this stuff. I mean, I think the relationship between McBee and Hallie, played by Mae Mercer, the slave, is really interesting, because she calls him out. He's not wrong, and she's not happy being a slave, but she also calls him out on his hypocrisy, which in some really interesting ways. There's just a lot of ambiguity. it's not particularly a gray paleted film. It's a very dark looking film, but it lives in a world of gray, this movie.
Yeah, I found it really fascinating throughout. I thought this, like the slow burning kind of tension, worked really well. And when you have a whole movie in one place, that can feel really claustrophobic after a while. But in this one, I never felt that. Like I felt like there was enough kind of going on in the story and so many characters to follow in this. And I mean, I feel like, did you feel like claustrophobic at all in this story? Like I feel like that. I mean, I guess the estate is big enough that we're never really in one room for too long. But I thought Don Siegel handled that element pretty well.
It felt like there's rooms we didn't see. I mean, maybe not literally, but it felt like the kind of place where there are, dark corners we didn't even get a chance to explore in this film.
Yeah, and I liked Geraldine Page a lot as an actress. I enjoy in pretty much everything I see her in. And I thought like her dynamic with Clint Eastwood was unusual and interesting. Like those are two actors I feel like you wouldn't necessarily expect to see in a film together. And I think they work off each other really well.
Oh, for sure. I mean, she does repression very well, and he does smoldering, come-ons really well. And it's a neat contrast. I think the Kidman-Farrell relationship is pretty, it mimics that pretty directly in the Coppola film. Not to take anything away from it, but it feels like the same dynamic.
Yeah, exactly. What else did anything we didn't like about the movie? Anything that struck you as odd or something that you feel like Siegel might have missed the mark on? Or do you feel like the movie works pretty well?
I think it works.
A couple things.
I think it works really well. I wouldn't want to sacrifice a turtle to the cause, but as a really fake-looking dead turtle in the one scene. So yes, I was happy that no turtles were harmed making this film. It did not look like a convincingly dead turtle.
Yeah, and this has come up just this week on a podcast episode for another film, the Big Dollhouse. What's up with blood looking so fake around this time? Like when he's getting his leg amputated, the blood looks really fake.
You actually came to the right person, because I wrote a whole article about this for the Ringer.
You did?
In the fall. And the short answer is there was 3M developed a product called Nextel.
Okay.
Which was touted as this miracle replacement for old ways of using fake blood, because it washed out of costumes very easily. And as movie viewers, we don't always even think about the difficulties of making movies. But if you need to you can't just throw stuff away. You got to wash it and use it again, and you need extra takes and things like that. So it just came in this easy to use container, and it looked really fake. It was used all over the late 60s. I think it debuted in 69.
Okay.
Through the 70s. I feel like by the early 80s, you kind of get a darker, more realistic kind of blood. I mean, it is, looping back to Dawn of the Dead. It's all over Dawn of the Dead, to the point where Tom Savini has been kind of apologetic about it. But to me, it is fake, but I'm not someone who dislikes effects for being janky. I mean, you're watching a movie. A movie is not reality. It's a dream that we kind of agree to share together while we're watching it. And again, I just complained about the fake turtle, but for some reason that took me out of the film in the way the fake blood doesn't.
Yeah, and the turtle, when it dies, like there's like the fake blood on the turtle's head, and so that I feel like makes it look even more fake.
Yeah.
But it looks better in this than in the Big Dollhouse, starring Pam Grier, her first major movie. The blood is like orange in that movie. Some
of it's lighting also. It's just
okay.
You don't. There was a way to light things. The old way of lighting things didn't necessarily apply to the new blood technology.
Because there are horror films of the 70s where I don't really notice the blood looking super fake, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Carrie. Like there are films where I'm not like, oh gosh, that blood is taking me out of the movie. Like sometimes it looks pretty good.
It is. I'd have to dig up with the details, but it was a formula created by Dick Smith, the makeup artist, who basically every major makeup and special effects, practical special effects breakthrough from a certain era can be traced back to him. But it was a fairly simple formula that he actually published in a book and was shared freely with people. And that stuff looks real. It does. But on the other hand, if you look at something like Ganja and Hess, another 70s horror film, a good one too, and another very dreamy. And actually, that would be it's kind of Beguiled-like in some ways, but the blood does not look like blood.
So the other thing that bothered me a little bit, I don't know if this bothered you at all, was the voiceover in the movie, and how we sometimes go into voiceover of like each of the characters. Like, what do you think was the reason behind that? Just to give them a little bit more dimension? It just felt kind of strange to have these little glimpses of voiceover with more than one character, which was kind of an unusual choice.
That makes sense. It doesn't really bother me, but it's like the ninth thing I remember about the film, and like until you brought it up again, it wasn't even on my mind and thinking about this. So it probably, if there's an extraneous element, that's probably a good one to point to. It's certainly not, it's not a Terrence Malick film where that's the whole point of it.
Yeah. But yeah, for the most part, I really, really enjoyed this. I loved at the beginning how it just, the story starts right away. There's not a 10-minute setup and then, following Eastwood for a little bit. Like, he is discovered in the very first almost shot and then taken back to the house. So this movie does not waste any time at the beginning, which I appreciated.
Yeah, it fills in the blanks through flashbacks, ample flashbacks.
Yeah, I love the flashback to Eastwood, like how he got shot. I thought that was really dynamic, and especially since we're in the house so much, it was nice to get outside for a minute and like see how he came to be in that state when we first meet him.
I like that nice bit of ironic narration where he's talking about his pacifism and his bravery and his pacifism and his actual actions bear no resemblance to what he's talking about.
Yeah, and there's some really memorable scenes here. I love the lovemaking dream between him and Geraldine Page is shot really well and really, really interesting. And boy, there's like two really fantastic scenes at the end. I mean, the first one, when he throws the turtle, that's not the best part of that scene. But when he comes in there and they're all at the table and he unloads everything that's happened onto these women, and Geraldine Page is just kind of like staring forward, and she's like turning in her mind like, this guy's got to go. Like, I thought that was a really great scene for Eastwood too.
Oh, for sure. And then the suspense around the mushrooms, about whether or not Edwina's going to eat the mushrooms, it's not like that character is necessarily sympathetic, but you feel for her in that moment where her life is going in one direction. She knows her life is going in one direction, and we know it's definitely not going in the direction that she thinks it is. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and that last scene, there's so much. Even though I knew it was coming, there's still great suspense with that giant. That is a giant bowl of mushrooms, and he's just going to town, and Siegel just keeps cutting to the other women, and Paige is kind of looking forward, like, yep. And then the suspense of of Edwina taking a bite and having to like, she like pulls it out of her mouth. And I love that we don't see Eastwood's death on camera. Like, I really like that it's really on Paige's face when we hear him crash to the ground. I thought that was a good choice too.
Yeah, and not necessarily an intuitive choice, but one that works really well. I also really love the scene. I really like is the scene where the Confederate soldiers show up and to protect them, and then the air is thick with sexual threat and the way Paige's character navigates this situation, that she knows exactly how to handle it where it doesn't, before it gets out of hand. It's remarkably well done too, I thought.
Yeah, I made a note of that. Like, it seems like hard for someone like Paige's character Martha in this time. Like, could she ever relax for a day? Because she would never know like who was going to be knocking on her door any given day. The
detail of taking down the name of the school was a nice detail as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you think Don Siegel did well in this film as the director? Like, what did he bring to this project that maybe someone else might not have been able to bring?
I think another director might have been timid about being as lurid as this film is. A lot of his films, I was reading a little bit of like contemporary reviews, and what his reputation was at the time was there's a long defense from a critic named Stuart Rosenthal in St. Louis about how he is underappreciated. Like, people didn't understand how great Siegel was. Another one referred to him as a cult favorite. So like already, it doesn't necessarily a term I thought of being in a wide circulation, referring to a director in the early 70s, but he definitely had that reputation as well. But he also referenced about how his films played in exploitation houses, and that's this was not, and he did not have a air class about his films. And I think that can be to his credit as well. I think it can be a tool to not be afraid to open the film with, Clint Eastwood kissing a 13-year-old girl. I mean, this is not, this is a shocking, maybe more shocking now than then, but still, the old enough for kissing moment tells you exactly what kind of dangerous territory you're in with this film.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think Don Siegel has been as appreciated as a lot of other prolific filmmakers of his time. I mean, he was directing from what, like the 40s to the early 80s. I saw his last film. His last film credit was Jinxed, starring Bette Midler.
Which I think he had a horrible.
Oh, he had a heart attack.
Okay. I think so, something like that. It did not end well.
There's a quote where I guess it was just a miserable experience making that movie for him. And then he was like, I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah. There's sometimes they just step away, and that's, you can't blame people for it. It's a tough business.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I thought, I think when I think of Don Siegel, I think of Dirty Harry, not so much like the Beguiled, and so it was kind of cool to watch this movie for the first time and see, he did have, he was able to paint with different colors, and he had different, kinds of sensibilities than I would have thought. This does not feel like a Don Siegel movie, and I appreciated that about it. Yeah,
I can see that.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other performances you want to talk about? Anything else we haven't mentioned about Eastwood in this film? I mean, I think, was it Quentin Tarantino who said in a quote that he felt that Eastwood was miscast for this? But I thought he was great. I really liked that you come into this with some sympathy for him. We love Clint Eastwood in so many projects, and the way that we're taken aback by his behavior, especially in the second half. And what he does and what he says is just so vile. I really took to that, and as much as I love Colin Farrell as an actor, I mean, I thought you could kind of see that coming in the remake, whereas in this movie it really just comes out of left field for somebody like Eastwood. I thought
the expectations for heroism are there, and I think you're right. They kind of erode over the course of the film, where by the end it's kind of laid bare who this person is. But you kind of go into it with the illusion that this is the good guy. I mean, there's a little bit of that in High Plains Drifter, the film he would direct a couple years later, where he's a very not heroic figure in that film, albeit the people he's up against are worse. It's the only way he comes off as anything like a good guy in that movie.
Yeah, and talk about a long, prolific career for Eastwood. I believe he had his early film credits like 1955 Revenge of the Creature.
Yep, I actually just watched that movie recently, and there he is as a lab technician.
As a lab technician.
Yeah.
And he has a new movie called Cry Macho coming out later in 2021. So that's a long career.
He does not stop working, and I kind of love that about him too, and he just churns them out, and sometimes they're really great. I mean, I like more Clint Eastwood movies than I dislike, for sure, and I look forward to new ones all the time. Sometimes you get Jersey Boys, but I think sometimes you get The Mule, which I thought was a really remarkable film. And he remains an interesting director, and he's doing his own thing, and God bless him.
Yeah, absolutely. And Geraldine Page, as I said before, is really great in this. She almost becomes like a Lady Macbeth almost when she takes her hair down, and she's got the long flowing hair, and the way she stares at Eastwood, it's like, oh, he's not getting out of here alive. You really get a sense that she has a plan in the works. And I thought she was great in this too. I've always really enjoyed her in film, and she has also a really prolific and long career that she had into the 1980s
on stage and screen. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. All right, so that takes us to, it's usually my final question about the movie is what would this movie look like in 2021? So I thought we could end just by kind of talking a little bit more about the remake and kind of comparing the two. What did Sofia Coppola do in the remake that you remember that that was different or better, or anything that you noticed comparing this to the 71 original?
I mean, I had not seen the original in years when I saw the Coppola version, and but at the time I thought, these aren't drastically different in some ways. Not taking anything away from what she did, because I think it's a really good movie. But it's not a total rethinking of the material. But I think she kind of intensifies. I think there's a little bit of there's a little bit of a perspective shift. I think I don't think you're necessarily sympathetic to Kidman and any more sympathetic to Kidman in that movie than you are in this one. But I think it's very much a focus on this outsider who comes in and upsets this balance that was there, just in some ways just by being a man, but also by an attractive man with some sort of sexual magnetism, and how that's creates a chaos that has to basically be dealt with. In some ways, it's a story of in both versions, but I think perhaps maybe a little more emphasized in a couple of versions. It's a story of an invader who has to be taken care of in order for things to carry on like they were.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I noted about the 71 original that I enjoyed was that I didn't really know any of the actors beyond Geraldine Page and Clint Eastwood. So I was able to get invested in those characters a little bit more, not thinking about their other works and things. Whereas you're watching the Coppola version, like you have Kirsten Dunst and Elle Fanning as some of the younger girls. So I mean, not to say that makes the film worse or anything, but you are a little bit more aware of those actors and their filmographies, whereas you watch the 71 version and all the younger actresses were new to me, so I could really just kind of get invested in them as characters and not have to look past their filmographies and things.
Yeah, but I think Coppola uses that well in some ways. It kind of, in some ways, plays against the expectations you bring with some, kind of like Eastwood here, plays against the expectations you have for some of these actors coming in. I mean, Elizabeth Hartman's really interesting because I wasn't even aware of this, but I mean, she really did not appear in much after this. She struggled with depression and killed herself at a young age.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But I mean, other film I knew her from was Walking Tall, where she was the female lead in that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sad story.
Yeah, that's
and on that note, let's bring everyone down. Sorry about
that. But yeah, I think the remake is really strong, and I've always loved the work of Sofia Coppola. I mean, Lost in Translation is one of my favorite movies, so I will follow her anywhere. I really enjoyed her new film On the Rocks, and
yeah, me too.
Really interesting filmmaker. Always takes chances and does new things. I believe that was her only like remake of a movie, right? Was the Beguiled? Did she ever remake anything? Yeah.
So I'm aware of. And also, one thing I like about her is the deeper she gets into her career, the less I know what to expect of her. Each film's a little different. I was not On the Rocks does not necessarily have a piece of what she'd done before in style or tone. Thematically, I think very much so. But yeah, it was fun to watch that.
Yeah, and the way she uses some actors in more than one film in different ways. We got Bill Murray and On the Rocks after Lost in Translation. She uses Kirsten Dunst a lot. And so, yeah, I mean, I've really been fascinated by her career. And it felt like a property that it made sense for a female writer director to come on board the Beguiled and make her version. I thought that was like an appropriate, film to do that for. And I thought she did a really great job.
It also looks great too. I think it's plunged into darkness as this one is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that takes us to our final two segments, Keith. I wanted to ask you about the Divine Double Feature. That's where we pick a more modern film that we think would make kind of a neat pairing with the 1971 original, The Beguiled. I mean, the obvious choice would be to watch the remake right afterwards, but I don't know if that would be the best advice for someone to watch both versions back to back. So what's a newer film of like the last 20-ish years that you think would make kind of an interesting follow-up movie directly after the 71 original?
So I was looking for other Southern Gothics, and I really did not hit on anything recent that I would want to recommend or had seen. I mean, one older film that would be a good pairing with this would be Wise Blood. So I kind of went in a different direction, which is the 2014 The Duke of Burgundy. Have you seen this film?
No. What is that about?
So you should check this out. It's
writing it down.
Director Peter Strickland, who also did the Barbarian sound system, and it is you won't see anything else like it. It is, and if I describe it to you, it basically sounds like something you'd watch on Cinemax in the 90s. But it's about these two women who, it's revealed fairly quickly. One is studying butterflies, so it's a film filled with butterflies and used in all kinds of different symbolic ways. But it's two women who are in a dominant submissive relationship. Although the nature of it is not clear until the film progresses, like, who's actually controlling this relationship. It sounds like this is a sex-filled film. It is not. It's a very erotic film, but it's not sexually explicit in the least. It's all in the style. Like, this thing is directed with, sort of just this intense atmosphere that I've referenced it before, but films that are dreamlike to me are have a shortcut to my heart, and this is something that just kind of proceeds through this this hazy psychological space where it's not clear who is in charge of the relationship. And I think that kind of connects to The Beguiled in some ways as well, because it is a film in which very much about who has the upper hand in any scene, in any moment, who is controlling whom. This is a different sort of exploration of the same thing, but I think it would actually make an interesting double feature. So that would be my recommendation, and certainly worth seeking out, even if for whatever reason.
Oh yeah, I'm always looking for new films to check out, and this sounds really fascinating. I will watch it for sure. Thank you for that recommendation. So I went with there were so many quotes from Tarantino about the Beguiled that I had him in my mind when I was thinking, and I thought, going from this kind of like quiet intensity, kind of slow burn of a movie, I thought it like kind of a cool one to follow it up with. Also about a vile man and a lot of women going after him, and that would be Death Proof from 2007. I went with Death Proof with Kurt Russell and another great ensemble of women, much different in style, but I felt like after almost 2 hours of this kind of like the slow moving drama, The Beguiled, to be kind of like an interesting pairing to look at a more modern film that has some thematic similarities, but done in a different way, in a different style, much faster paced. It's not one of my favorite Tarantino movies, but I definitely still think about it sometimes, especially that last half hour is really dynamic. Did you like Death Proof?
I love Death Proof, actually. Okay. Yeah, it feels like his kind of like it's like Tarantino writing it. He didn't write a college thesis, but so he made this movie instead. It's just sort of like his exploration of how a certain type of horror film works and a certain type of action film works, and like you get that pivot in the middle there as well. I love that movie. It's a good one. Do you have a preference between the longer version or the Grindhouse version?
I remember I saw the Grindhouse version opening weekend with my dad, and it was it was absolutely fantastic movie going experience. And ever since that, I feel like I've only seen Death Proof a couple times since. I have not watched the whole thing all the way through. Is that available like on Blu-ray? Can you watch the whole thing?
Yeah, there's a Grindhouse there's a Death Proof Blu-ray and there's a Grindhouse Blu-ray.
Okay. Because there was an extended cut, a director's cut of Death Proof, I believe went longer, and I watched that a few years later. Yeah.
I actually like the shorter version better. I think it's got like that scene missing gag is not in the longer version. The longer version does have, speaking of connections,
and it has Nicolas Cage, right?
Yes, that's true. But the longer version of Death Proof itself has a scene where a character walks into like some sort of gas station, and they have, for some reason, film comment, but with Sofia Coppola on the cover, because I believe there was briefly a Tarantino Coppola dalliance of some kind, and this comes from that period. A little
interesting
tip of the hat. Nothing else, a tip of the hat to a fellow director he admires.
Yeah, and I love Kurt Russell in that movie. We just did an episode on The Barefoot Executive.
I have never had the pleasure, I'm afraid.
Which is not even on Disney Plus, but I was like, I had never seen a young Kurt Russell Disney movie, so I was like, I got to check out one of these. And boy, it was rough. And he was so stiff in that movie. It's kind of amazing to me just how much he developed as an actor over the decades, because he got to be such a great actor, one of my favorites. And I think one of his best performances is in Death Proof. I think he's great in that.
Yeah, he's great. I just saw him. I just watched one of those for the first time. It was the one where
the computer wore tennis shoes.
Is that the one where he has an invisibility formula, or it's a sequel?
Maybe to that? there's like 10 of them. He's in a bunch.
Dexter, yeah. Now you see him, now you don't. He played the character Dexter Riley, and he was just a quintessential like fresh-faced, like kind of Archie Andrews all-American boy, and to have him evolve into like this this epitome of like grizzled sort of our John Wayne in some ways.
It took John Carpenter to give him an edge, right? Because I feel like 1981's Escape from New York, that's kind of his first like adult role. I mean, he's in Used Cars.
Elvis for John Carpenter. And I feel like that was kind of a breakthrough too, because I feel like with most Kurt Russell's performances, you either get some notes of Elvis or some notes of John Wayne, sometimes like a balance between the two. But not in a derivative way, but I think he's just very good at channeling a couple of different icons of American manhood to create new characters.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Death Proof I think would be a fun one to look at, especially if you haven't seen it in a while, or if you've never seen it before. Take a look. Our final segment is called Beyond the Flick. That's where we take like an actor from the film or director or somebody and kind of talk about their career a little bit more broadly. And I thought for this one, I am going to get to Eastwood later this year when we talk about his other two films. I thought for this one we could talk about Don Siegel. So what are some other films of his that you've seen, and what are your 2 or 3 favorites of the Siegel films?
Two or three favorites. Absolute favorites are easy because Dirty Harry is, to me, a film I could just revisit infinitely. Because, like I said, like this one, not to step on your inevitable episode on it, but I feel like that's a film just shot through with ambiguity. Like on one hand, yeah, it's a really kind of a nasty pro-vigilante movie, but I feel like the narrative and the way Siegel shoots it are often at odds, because there's a scene, like the scene leading up to the famous, do you feel lucky? There's just scene of, I think there's no score, and it's just Eastwood's Harry Callahan walking the streets of San Francisco with this huge gun as chaos erupts behind him, and it's like, this is kind of a horrific image. This is not a reassuring image of someone coming to deliver law and order. It's just what are we casting our lot in if this is our hero? Anyway, fascinating film. I love that one.
Andy's eating a hot dog, right?
I think he has to put a hot dog down to take care of business, if I'm not mistaken. The one couple I would recommend, it's on Criterion, and I think it's in the Criterion channel now. It's Riot and Cell Block 11.
I just watched it. It's so good. Yeah, it's great.
The one I need to see is The Killers. It's a movie I've been seeing for a long time. But in terms of other recommendations, I mean, Invasion of the Body Snatchers is another great film. Another film I feel like, politically, you can read it a bunch of different ways. And if you choose not to, you can just watch this really gripping, incredibly well staged film about, about paranoia and about, identities being leached away. And I don't know. I love the way he uses 50s America, 50s America as a chance. It's already conformity obsessed culture to stage this story. That's really good. And The Shootist. Have you seen The Shootist?
Yep, those are my three choices.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, well, let's zag then. I think Escape from Alcatraz is probably the one people see the least of these in some ways, or at least maybe it's the weakest critical reputation, but I think it's a remarkable film, and just really so much care goes into the detail of Alcatraz and the actual escape. Like it is kind of like a reverse heist film in some ways, where you kind of the planning and the stages needed to execute this escape are all laid out in this really no frills style that makes it even more intense, because Siegel's not pushing you to feel a certain way. He's just showing you what's happening and letting the suspense and tension build from there.
Yeah, I can't remember if I've seen Escape from Alcatraz. I feel like I have, but I couldn't really think of it. It wasn't coming to me. So if I were to look at it again, it might be in my top three, because I think, that's one of his stronger films for sure. So my other runners up, as you mentioned before, Coogan's Bluff, I saw a few years ago. That's also a really strong film. Their first film together, Eastwood and Siegel. But yeah, my top three. But number three was The Shootist, which I saw just once a few years ago. But it's the final film of John Wayne, right? So really important in his long filmography. And he had some stinkers, John Wayne, in the last decade of his career. We looked at one for the podcast a few months ago. Rio Lobo, the final film of Howard Hawks, which was a rough 2 hours, let me tell you.
I've that's its reputation. I've never gotten around to that one, in part because I love Hawks and I love Wayne. And watching the third take on Rio Bravo essentially wasn't. I don't know. I kind of just want to live with the memory of the one I enjoy so much. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about Hawks on the podcast, and that was going to be the only one. That was his final film from 1970. Yeah. So.
Yeah,
he didn't go out well.
Yeah, well, he worked. He like Eastwood, he kept working. He was established himself as a working director, and that was his identity. The Shootist is great too because got Jim Stewart in it as well, and it's very much it is not a revisionist Western in a lot of way we think of a revisionist Western, but it's very elegiac. It's very much a closing of the West kind of film that brings in all these classic. Kind of gives a last look at a lot of classic Western stars and elements too. Yeah, it's a really good one. Young Ron Howard too.
James Stewart, Ron Howard, and Lauren Bacall, right, is the female lead, and so it's got a great cast. I believe John Wayne didn't die until 1979. But I wonder if The Shootist was such a strong film. I wonder if there was some thought behind I'm just gonna make that the last film, or if he had tried to make another one. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, I'm sure he was quite ill toward the end. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
he seems not in top shape already in this
Yeah.
one.
But not all actors get a great final film, and I feel like John
No.
Wayne got that with The Shootist for sure. Yeah, and then the second favorite is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which was my big wow moment looking at Don Siegel's filmography this week. I did not know that Siegel directed that. I was like, oh wow, that was news to me. And yeah, I've seen that film at least twice. It's a lot of fun. Mid-50s, black and white. One of the most famous science fiction films, I would say, of that decade, right? I mean, just a really strong film that everyone should check out if you're interested in kind of older science fiction classics. It's one of those you have. I mean, they've remade it so many times, right? There's one in the 70s with Donald Sutherland that we'll get to at some point. And then I believe Sutherland appeared again in the 90s version, which was called The Puppet Masters.
Yeah, not quite the same thing. It's similar.
Not quite, yeah.
Yeah, there had been no bad version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers until the 2000s, I guess it would be, because you had the Siegel version in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
You had the Philip Kaufman version in the 70s, which is great. I think it rivals the original in terms of quality. Mm-hmm. You get Abel Ferrara's early 90s version, which I think is quite good as well. And then there's the Invasion with Nicole Kidman.
Oh, right. I never saw that.
Right. You don't have to. It could be worse, but it's certainly it's such a rich premise. And I loved how each preceding version kind of reinvented itself in a way that was thematically tied to the era. And the Invasion it's an alien invasion movie. It's not particularly notable other than beyond that.
Yeah. So definitely go with that 56 version. It's definitely worth a look. And yeah, my favorite that I've seen it at least twice, and that's Dirty Harry, which came out at the very end of 1971. So we will be talking about that in the months to come. But boy, what a fantastic vehicle for Eastwood, and just Siegel firing on all cylinders. Just a great action film, a great drama, really rich character development, and definitely one of my favorites from 71. So I'm excited to talk about that later this year. Are you a fan of the sequels as well, or I don't know if you call them sequels or further installments of the Dirty Harry series?
Each one a little less than the one before.
Don't like the Deadpool?
Deadpool's really bad. Yeah, it gets really bad by the end. Actually, I should qualify that. I think Sudden Impact is a really interesting movie.
Okay.
And it's really nasty and uncomfortable. Which is part of, as was the original. So I think it kind of connects it back that way. Magnum Force and The Enforcer are both, quite watchable. What's fun about those is is watching San Francisco change and like looking at this dead, sort of empty out spaces. Like, oh, if you could go back in time and buy up that real estate, you'd be so rich right now.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, but no, it's worth. I think they're all kind of worth your time in one way or another. Maybe not the Deadpool. Although Deadpool has Jim Carrey as a rock
Jim
star.
Carrey in a serious role very early in his career, just for like 2 scenes,
couple of scenes, but they're memorable, and also has a character basically killing Pauline Kael. There's a long, nasty relationship between Clint Eastwood and Pauline Kael that's sort of a final farewell to that, I guess, in some ways. Not the most graceful moment.
So kind of like what Roland Emmerich did in 1998's Godzilla with Siskel and Ebert.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
Yes, very subtle.
Yeah, no, I enjoy. The Deadpool's a little rough. I do enjoy aspects of the other 4, and I believe Clint Eastwood only directed 4 and 5. I don't think he directed the first 3.
Did he direct 5? He didn't actually.
Did he only direct the 4th?
Yeah. Buddy Van Horn. Buddy Van Horn directed the Deadpool, and he was like a long time, I think, AD.
Gotcha.
For Eastwood. So it's also one of those things where it's like he quote unquote didn't direct it,
Right. That would make sense, because 1988, I believe that's the year of Bird with Forrest Whitaker, which is a film that Clint Eastwood directed. So yeah, it would have been hard for him. He has done it. He's directed 2 films that came out in the same year, but he might have had too much on his plate at that time. Do you think he'll make another Dirty Harry, or is that done?
I think that's done. I think he's done with Westerns too, which I think it's fine. Unforgiven is one of my all-time favorite movies.
So good.
Let's go all the way back to the original beginning of the show. Unforgiven is one of my all-time favorite movies. I don't think you can make a better Western as a final Western than that one.
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't want to see like a 95-year-old Dirty Harry, old grizzled Dirty Harry?
I think honestly, I think I'd rather he bring back Dirty Harry than try another Western, because I think there's much less to tarnish there.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, Dirty Harry, my favorite of Siegel's works, but there, as we said before, dozens of films that Siegel has that he directed in his long career that I have not seen. So I'm gonna check out some more of his work, because he was making movies from the 40s all the way to the 80s. So there's a lot more for us to discover in the years to come. All right, so that takes us to the end of our episode. Thank you so much for doing this for me, Keith. This was so much fun to talk about the Beguiled with you today. To end here, I'd love for you to, maybe plug your book a little bit more. Tell us where we can find you online.
I was gonna force a plug on here if you didn't offer one. Well, I mean, I read all over the place, so you can. The best way to keep track of me is I'm on Twitter at kphipps3000. It's KPHIPPS3000. And so I linked everything I do there. But I also host a podcast called The Next Picture Show, with some longtime associates of mine, where we kind of did what you did at the end of this, toward the end of this episode, where we take a new film and pair it with a classic film.
Oh, cool.
We do, each one gets its own episode. So yeah, it's we enjoy that. But otherwise, you can find me at GQ, The Ringer, Vulture, TV Guide, all over the place. Age of Cage will be out this fall. It's from Holt. There's no pre-order link or anything to point you to, but just, if you're interested in all things Cage, keep it in your memory.
It's called Age of Cage.
I love Cage. It. Yep.
I will definitely be checking that out. Thank you so much for being here, Keith. And thanks to all of you for listening to Film at 50 today. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on all the socials and on the Patreon page to support the podcast. Check out exclusive bonus episodes, at least 2 a month. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.